What happens when America's sweetheart finds herself in the middle of a controversy that threatens to unravel everything she's built? What we witnessed on the Today Show with Jenna and friends was nothing short of explosive. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why Carrie Underwood made the shocking decision to walk away from one of television's most beloved morning shows. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story has layers that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about live television drama. The tension was palpable from the moment Carrie Underwood settled into the plush studio chair across from Jenna Hager and her co-hosts. What was supposed to be a routine promotional interview for her latest album quickly transformed into something entirely different. The camera operators, seasoned professionals who had seen it all, later described an unusual energy in the studio that morning, something that seemed to crackle beneath the surface of polite television conversation. Jenna opened with her signature warmth, that genuine smile that had made her a favorite among viewers nationwide. "Carrie, it's always such a pleasure to have you here with us. Your new album has been breaking records, and fans are absolutely loving the personal direction you've taken with these songs." Carrie's response came with a slight edge that careful viewers might have noticed. "Thank you, Jenna. I appreciate that, though I have to say, some of the coverage around the album has been, shall we say, interesting." The co-hosts exchanged quick glances, the kind of subtle communication that happens between experienced television personalities when they sense something brewing. Jenna maintained her professional composure, but there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes as she leaned forward slightly. "Interesting how?" Jenna asked, her voice carrying that perfect balance of journalistic inquiry and friendly concern. This was the moment when the interview began to shift into uncharted territory. Carrie's posture straightened, and her voice took on a tone that regular viewers of her interviews had rarely, if ever, heard before. "Well, there seems to be this narrative floating around that I've somehow abandoned my values, that this album represents some kind of dramatic personal transformation that people should be concerned about." The studio fell into one of those peculiar silences that can only happen on live television, where seconds feel like minutes and everyone involved becomes acutely aware that they're walking into something unexpected. Jenna's media training kicked in immediately, but even she seemed momentarily taken aback by the directness of Carrie's response. "I think what people are responding to is the authenticity in these new songs," Jenna offered carefully, clearly trying to steer the conversation back toward safer ground. "The way you've opened up about personal struggles and growth, it's really resonating with fans." But Carrie wasn't ready to let the moment pass. Her hands, which had been folded politely in her lap, now gestured with increasing animation as she spoke. "See, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Why does personal growth have to be framed as struggle? Why can't a woman evolve and explore different aspects of her artistry without it being dissected like some kind of psychological case study?" The other co-hosts, who had been content to let Jenna take the lead, now found themselves drawn into what was rapidly becoming less of an interview and more of a debate. One of them, clearly trying to diffuse the growing tension, jumped in with what seemed like a harmless observation. "Carrie, I think what's beautiful about your journey is how you've maintained your core values while still growing as an artist. That's not easy in this industry." The words had barely left the co-host's mouth when Carrie's expression shifted dramatically. What had been building tension suddenly crystallized into something much sharper, much more focused. "My core values," she repeated, her voice carrying a tone that made everyone in the studio sit up straighter. "And what exactly do you think those are?" This question hung in the air like a challenge, and suddenly everyone realized they were no longer in familiar territory. The comfortable rhythm of morning television, with its predictable patterns of question and answer, had been completely disrupted. What happened next would determine whether this interview could be salvaged or whether it would become something else entirely, something that would have viewers talking for weeks to come. The camera operators continued rolling, capturing every micro expression, every subtle shift in body language that would later be analyzed frame by viewers trying to understand exactly how a routine promotional interview had transformed into television gold. In studios across the country, producers were already making phone calls, recognizing that they were witnessing something special, something that would define this particular morning in television history. Jenna, to her credit, didn't back down from the challenge in Carrie's question, though her approach remained measured and professional. "Well, I think people see you as someone who represents family values, faith, authenticity. Those are the qualities that have made you not just a successful artist, but someone that families across America feel they can trust." The word trust seemed to trigger something in Carrie that no one in the studio had anticipated. Her entire demeanor shifted, and when she spoke again, there was an intensity that commanded complete attention from everyone present. "Trust," Carrie repeated, her voice dropping to a level that somehow commanded more attention than if she had shouted. "That's fascinating, Jenna, because I'm sitting here wondering who exactly decided what my values should be, and why everyone seems so invested in making sure I stay locked inside this neat little box that was apparently built for me without my permission." The studio atmosphere had completely transformed. What began as morning television pleasantries had evolved into something raw and unfiltered. Jenna's media training was being put to the ultimate test as she tried to navigate waters that were clearly deeper and more turbulent than anyone had anticipated. "I don't think anyone's trying to put you in a box, Carrie," Jenna responded, though her voice carried a slight tremor that suggested she was beginning to realize this conversation was spiraling beyond her control. "I think people just connect with the messages in your music, the way you've always represented certain values." Carrie leaned forward, her eyes never leaving Jenna's face. "But that's exactly the problem, isn't it? You keep saying what I've always represented, as if I'm some kind of static museum piece instead of a living, breathing, evolving human being. Tell me, Jenna, when was the last time someone questioned whether you were staying true to your core values when you expressed a new opinion or explored a different perspective?" The question hit its mark with surgical precision. Jenna's composure faltered for just a moment, long enough for viewers to see that this wasn't just about Carrie anymore. This was about something much larger, something that resonated with anyone who had ever felt trapped by other people's expectations. One of the co-hosts, perhaps sensing that Jenna needed support, attempted to redirect the conversation. "Carrie, I think what we're all trying to say is that your fans love you for who you are. They're not trying to limit you, they're celebrating you." Carrie's laugh held no humor whatsoever. "Are they celebrating me, or are they celebrating their idea of me? Because there's a significant difference, and frankly, I'm getting tired of pretending there isn't." The tension in the studio had reached a point where even the crew members were exchanging glances. This wasn't just uncomfortable television. This was becoming a moment of genuine confrontation that no one had prepared for. Jenna, however, seemed to find her footing again, drawing on reserves of professionalism that had served her well throughout her career. "Carrie, I hear what you're saying, and I respect that you want to grow and evolve as an artist. But surely, you can understand why people might be confused when someone they've looked up to for years suddenly seems to be rejecting everything they thought they knew about her." The word rejecting proved to be the match that lit the powder keg. Carrie's eyes flashed with an anger that was unmistakable, and when she spoke, her voice carried the kind of controlled fury that is far more intimidating than any outburst. "Rejecting," she said, each syllable pronounced with deliberate precision. "Let me tell you what I'm rejecting. Jenna, I'm rejecting the idea that I owe anyone an explanation for my personal growth. I'm rejecting the notion that I have to get permission from strangers to explore different aspects of my own identity. And I'm absolutely rejecting this interview format where I'm supposed to sit here and defend my right to be a complex human." The studio fell into complete silence. This wasn't the comfortable pause of morning television. This was the kind of silence that happens when everyone present realizes they're witnessing something that will be talked about for a very long time. The camera operators continued their work with professional detachment, but even they seemed to understand that they were capturing television history in the making. Jenna, to her credit, didn't retreat from the challenge. Her voice remained steady, though there was now an edge to it that matched Carrie's intensity. "Nobody's asking you to defend anything, Carrie. We're having a conversation about your music and your career. That's what interviews are for, are they?" Carrie shot back immediately. "Because it seems to me like this conversation stopped being about music the moment you started talking about my values and what people expect from me. When did my album become secondary to your analysis of whether I'm living up to some arbitrary standard that I never agreed to be measured against?" The other co-hosts were now completely silent, recognizing that this had become a two-person confrontation that was beyond their ability to mediate. The professional dynamics of the show had collapsed entirely, replaced by something much more personal and much more volatile. Jenna's response came with a firmness that suggested she wasn't going to back down. "Carrie, with respect, when you release music that deals with personal topics and then come on shows like ours to promote it, you're inviting that analysis. That's how this industry works, and you know that better than anyone." The implication, in Jenna's words, that Carrie was being naive or disingenuous about the nature of celebrity interviews, seemed to strike a nerve that ran deeper than anything that had come before. Carrie's entire posture changed, and when she stood up from her chair, everyone in the studio knew that they had crossed a line from which there would be no return. "You know what, Jenna?" Carrie said, her voice now carrying a finality that sent chills through everyone present. "You're absolutely right about one thing. I do know how this industry works. I know exactly how it works, and I'm done pretending that I have to participate in the parts of it that diminish who I am as a person." The moment Carrie rose from her chair, the entire energy of the studio shifted into something electric and unpredictable. Everyone present understood they were witnessing the point of no return, that invisible line in live television that once crossed, changes everything that comes after. Jenna remained seated, but her posture had stiffened, and there was a look in her eyes that suggested she too was prepared to see this confrontation through to its conclusion. "Carrie, please sit down," Jenna said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from years of handling difficult interviews. "Let's finish this conversation like professionals." The request, delivered with such measured control, seemed to ignite something in Carrie that had been building throughout the entire exchange. Her response came with an intensity that made everyone in the studio acutely aware that they were no longer dealing with the polished, media-trained celebrity they thought they knew. Professionals, Carrie repeated, her voice rising for the first time during the interview. You want to talk about professionalism? Let me tell you what's professional, Jenna. Professional would have been doing your homework about my album instead of coming in here with preconceived notions about what my music means. Professional would have been asking me about my songwriting process, my creative inspirations, the technical aspects of the recording. Professional would not have been ambushing me with amateur psychology about my personal evolution. Jenna's composure finally began to crack under the weight of Carrie's words. Her voice took on a defensive edge that viewers had rarely heard from her before. Nobody ambushed you, Carrie. These are legitimate questions about an album you put out for public consumption. If you didn't want people to discuss the personal themes in your music, maybe you shouldn't have made them the central focus of your promotional campaign. The accusation hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down, and Carrie's reaction was immediate and fierce. Her eyes narrowed, and when she spoke, every word was delivered with the precision of someone who had finally decided to drop all pretense of polite television conversation. My promotional campaign, she said, her voice dripping with disbelief. Jenna, I've done exactly 3 interviews about this album, and in every single one, the focus has been on dissecting my personal life instead of celebrating the artistry. You want to know what's really happening here? You're upset because I'm not giving you the sanitized, comfortable version of myself that makes for easy television. You're frustrated because I refuse to be the docile celebrity who sits here and smiles while you reduce 2 years of creative work to a therapy session for your viewers' entertainment. The co-hosts had become mere spectators to what was now clearly a battle of wills between 2 strong women who had reached the limits of their patience with each other. The camera operators continued their work with the dedication of professionals, but even they seemed to recognize that they were documenting something extraordinary. Jenna stood up now too, matching Carrie's energy with her own brand of controlled determination. Carrie, you're being unfair, and you know it. We've been respectful, we've been professional, and we've given you every opportunity to share your perspective. If you're not happy with the direction of the conversation, then participate in changing it instead of attacking us for doing our jobs. The word attacking seemed to be the final straw for Carrie. Her entire demeanor shifted from anger to something colder, more final. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet but carried the kind of authority that commanded absolute attention from everyone present. You know what, Jenna? You're absolutely right. I should participate in changing the direction of this conversation. So let me make this very clear to you and to everyone watching. I didn't come here to be psychoanalyzed by people who think they understand my motivations better than I do. I didn't come here to defend my right to grow as an artist and as a human being. And I certainly didn't come here to be lectured about professionalism by someone who thinks ambush journalism disguised as morning television fluff is somehow doing the public a service. The silence that followed was deafening. Jenna's face had gone pale, and the other co-hosts looked like they wished they could disappear entirely. This was no longer an interview gone wrong. This was a complete breakdown of the social contract that makes television interviews possible. Jenna's response, when it finally came, was delivered with a coldness that matched Carrie's own. If that's how you feel about it, Carrie, then maybe you should reconsider why you agreed to come on the show in the first place. The challenge, in Jenna's words, was unmistakable, and Carrie's reaction was swift and decisive. She reached down to remove her microphone with movements that were deliberate and final, each action clearly communicating her intention to everyone present. You know what, Jenna? You're absolutely right again. I should reconsider a lot of things, starting with why I continue to subject myself to interviews with people who are more interested in controversy than conversation, more invested in conflict than creativity. As Carrie began to detach her microphone equipment, the technical crew scrambled to figure out how to handle a situation that was clearly unprecedented in their experience. The producers, watching from the control room, were faced with decisions that would determine not just how this segment ended, but how it would be remembered. Jenna made one final attempt to salvage the situation, her voice now carrying a note of desperation that she couldn't quite hide. Carrie, please don't do this. We can start over. We can talk about whatever you want to talk about. But Carrie was already moving toward the edge of the interview area, her microphone now completely removed and held in her hand like a symbol of her liberation from the constraints of the conversation. When she turned back to face Jenna one final time, there was something in her expression that suggested this moment had been the look on Carrie's face as she turned back toward Jenna and the cameras was one that would be replayed countless times in the hours and days that followed. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't frustration. It was something much more powerful and much more final. It was the expression of someone who had reached a moment of absolute clarity about what they would and would not accept. You want to know what I want to talk about, Jenna, she said, her voice carrying across the studio with crystal clarity. I want to talk about the fact that we just spent 20 minutes discussing everything except my music. I want to talk about how female artists are expected to justify their artistic evolution in ways that male artists never are. I want to talk about how morning television has become a place where real conversation gets sacrificed for manufactured drama. But most of all, I want to talk about how I'm done being complicit in my own diminishment. The words hit the studio like a thunderclap. Even the seasoned television professionals present seem stunned by the raw honesty and intensity of Carrie's final statement. Jenna, who had weathered the entire confrontation with remarkable composure, now looked genuinely shaken. "Carrie," she began, but her voice faltered as she seemed to realize that there were no words that could bridge the gap that had opened between them. Carrie held up her hand, a gesture that was both gentle and absolutely final. "No, Jenna, done here. I came on this show to share my music with people who might appreciate it, not to be dissected like a specimen under a microscope. The fact that you can't see the difference between those two things tells me everything I need to know about why this conversation went the way it did." She took a step toward the exit, then paused and looked directly into the camera, addressing the viewers with the same intensity she had brought to her confrontation with Jenna. "To anyone watching who has ever felt pressured to stay small so that other people can feel comfortable. To anyone who has been told that growth equals betrayal, to anyone who has been made to feel like they need permission to evolve, this one's for you. You don't owe anyone an explanation for becoming who you're meant to be." With those words, Carrie Underwood walked off the Today Show set, leaving behind a silence so complete that the sound technicians later said they could hear the air conditioning system for the first time all morning. Jenna remained standing where the confrontation had ended, looking like someone who was still processing what had just happened. The camera operators, trained to capture every moment regardless of circumstances, continued rolling as Jenna attempted to regain her composure and address the audience. Her voice, when she finally found it, carried a tremor that betrayed how deeply the exchange had affected her. "Well," she said, attempting to inject some normalcy into a situation that was anything but normal, "that was certainly not how we expected this interview to go. We want to thank Carrie for her time and for her honesty." The awkwardness of the moment was palpable, made worse by the fact that it was happening on live television with no opportunity for editing or damage control. The other co-hosts looked like they were still trying to process what they had witnessed, their usual television cheerfulness replaced by genuine bewilderment. One of them finally managed to speak, though their voice lacked any of the confidence that typically characterized morning television banter. "I think we can all agree that was a very passionate discussion about artistry and personal growth." The attempt to normalize what had just happened only served to highlight how extraordinary the moment had been. In studios across the country, producers were already making calls, recognizing that they had just witnessed something that would dominate entertainment news cycles for days to come. Jenna, gathering herself with the professionalism that had defined her career, looked directly into the camera and addressed the audience with as much dignity as she could muster. "We always appreciate it when our guests bring their authentic selves to our show, even when that leads to difficult conversations. Art is personal, creativity is personal, and sometimes those personal elements create tension. That you just witnessed." The segment ended with an abruptness that left viewers around the country staring at their screens, trying to process what they had just seen. Social media platforms immediately began buzzing with clips, commentary, and analysis of every moment of the confrontation. The interview had become much more than entertainment. It had become a cultural moment that sparked conversations about celebrity, authenticity, artistic freedom, and the nature of public expectation. What made this confrontation so compelling wasn't just the drama of the moment, but the deeper questions it raised about how we consume celebrity culture and what we expect from the artists we claim to admire. Carrie Underwood's walk-off wasn't just about one difficult interview. It was about the broader dynamics of fame, growth, and the courage it takes to refuse to be diminished by other people's comfort zones. The ripple effects of those 20 minutes would be felt far beyond the studio walls, sparking debates about media responsibility, artistic integrity, and the price of authenticity in a world that often prefers its celebrities predictable and contained. It was a reminder that behind every public figure is a real person with real boundaries, and sometimes those boundaries get tested in ways that create unforgettable television. So what do you think? Was Carrie justified in walking off, or should she have handled the situation differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that go beyond the headlines to explore the real human drama behind the entertainment industry's biggest moments.